Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in today's video, we are going to be using Plasticity to create a AA and AAA 3D printed battery tray. I get a lot of requests for Plasticity content, specifically for more Plasticity courses on our Learn Everything About Design website. Right now, we've only got the one. We will be doing more. We've just kind of been swamped with other stuff. And in this video, we're going to focus on basic design skills, design for 3D printing. I get a lot of these requests. I do also, anytime somebody requests a video, I make a note of it. So I know there's one for Plasticity for things like 3D printed gears, Plasticity for making molds or cavities of 3D designs. All those are on my list and I will get to them. It's just a bit swamped right now. So in this video, you'll notice a couple of things that are different. One, I've got my picture, my webcam on the video. Because of how many videos are coming out with AI content and things are getting copied, I figured I'd start putting my face on here, at least in the short term, to hopefully show you that it's still a real person and it's not AI generated content. So with all that said, let's go ahead and dive in. Now, the Plasticity version I'm using here, there is an update available. It really shouldn't matter which version you have. We're not going to be using any special tools or techniques. So if you're just getting started and you've got a little bit of experience with Plasticity, you should be able to follow along. We're not going to be using a ton of shortcut keys, but if you are completely new to Plasticity, I would definitely suggest you check out our getting started content where we really walk more through the basics of workflow and things like that. In this video, we're going to go through a basic project and design for 3D printing. Again, these little organization trays, I use them all over the place. I have a couple in a drawer in the kitchen where I put batteries in. I put things like scissors and all kinds of other random stuff that just gets all mixed up in a drawer, and these kind of help keep everything organized. So this video, we're going to focus on that. So the first thing that we want to do when you start Plasticity is delete the cube. Now the cube is kind of a starting point for most designs. Just hit delete on the keyboard. If you want to change your startup scene to not have that cube, you can save a new startup scene. So basically you go down to save a startup scene, and that'll let you start without that cube. We're going to zoom in a bit. You'll notice that as we zoom in, we've got a grid here. Let's go ahead and hit the / on the keyboard. It'll zoom back to the origin. All of the grid settings can be now found on the right-hand side in Plasticity version 25. And 24, we had to go into the basically the preferences menu, but you can do it all from the right side over here now. If you want to snap to the grid, you can turn that on and tweak any of these settings. It won't really matter for what we're doing, but just note that you can do that. All right, the first thing that we want to do is a basic example to understand some of the basic tools. So obviously we're going to be making a battery tray. So being able to create a simple battery, we're not going to go fully detailed in this, but a simple battery as kind of a size reference can be helpful. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to use the cylinder tool. Very simple, very straightforward. To do this, we really want to pick a coordinate system, or in this case, one of the default planes. You can do this with shortcut keys on the numpad 1, 3, and 7. In our case, what I'm going to do is use the view cube and click on X. So when I click on X, we automatically go to the right view. We're going to go to the cylinder tool. We're going to click on the origin and start to drag this out. Now, as we drag this out, you'll notice there's a dimension in the middle. We're going to hit the tab key, which will highlight that dimension. And then we're going to enter 14.5 millimeters. Hit enter on the keyboard. It's going to bring you into the cylinder tool, the dialog on the screen. We're going to rotate this around with the middle mouse button. Now, you can manually drag this out, but what we want to do is we want to enter a height value by clicking and saying 50.5 millimeters and hit enter. Now, 50.5 is roughly the full size of a AA battery, and that includes the positive post on the top of it. So if you want to make a detailed version of this, you can, but for our purposes, this is going to be fine. We can either click OK or you can right click to accept. Now that we have this, I always like to work from the origin whenever possible. So I want to move this to the origin. Some tools, like for example, and you don't have to follow along with this, but for example, if we were to create a cylinder like this, click on it and begin to extrude it, We have the option down here to lock distances, which if we hit tab, what that'll actually do is allow it to be essentially a mid-plane extrude. So if we had drawn a circle and done a mid-plane extrude like this, it would have been easier and already centered for us. For our purposes, again, I want to use these basic tools so we understand. So now that we've got this cylinder, we'll left click to select it. We want to move it so that it's centered at the origin. At least in this case, we want the middle of it to be basically middle aligned with Y. So we're going to do this by using the move command. This can be done with G on the keyboard. We only want to move it in the X direction. You can use the shortcuts by clicking X, but I'm going to manually drag this back. You can see the number on the screen, minus 27.77. This is not going to be very precise. There are other ways to do this. For example, implementing a pivot point and snapping. For our purposes, because we know we just extruded this at 50.5 millimeters long, what we're going to do is type minus 50.5 divided by 2 and hit enter. That'll give us exactly the 25.25 millimeters to center this thing. I'm going to hit enter. Again, we can do some of those math operations in there. We can use some other tools like resetting the pivot point, using point to point or snapping. All of those will work fine. The other thing that I want to do is go to my X view. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And I want the bottom of this to be above the X axis. So once again, I'm going to use move. I'm going to begin to pull this up. And then I'm going to come down into the Z dimension. And remember, we made this a 14.5 millimeter diameter divided by 2. And then that should be perfectly on the X axis. Once again, there are other ways to do this. This is not the only way. But as you're getting started, getting comfortable with these tools, we don't want to dive too far into some of these other settings. All right, so now that we've got a cylinder here, just for fun, we're going to go ahead and select an edge, shift and select the other edge, and then we're going to pull them outward to create a small fillet. Manually click on this and hit 1 and hit enter to accept. So now we've got a basic battery. From here, obviously we don't want to make a tray just for one battery. We need a bunch of batteries. We need to decide how big it's going to be. The thing that I want to talk about here is the use of the array tool. Now I'm going to select the battery. I'm going to select rectangular array. And one thing you'll notice is that a pink line appears when it snaps in the X direction. And you'll notice a very small X appears next to the cursor. So what this is telling us is that this is snapping in the X direction. So what we're going to do is I'm going to left click and we're going to go to spacing. I'm going to set the spacing at 14.5. That's the diameter. And then the number of instances that we want. Let's say that we want this thing to hold 5 batteries. So that'll give me perfect spacing for 5 batteries exactly touching each other, and we can hit enter. Now the problem here is we're no longer centered on the origin. So once again, everything is selected. What we can do is select move. We want to move back in the Y direction. And again, we could use some snaps here, or we can use some of these other settings. So basically what we want is minus 14.5 times 2. And that's going to give us exactly 29 millimeters, and it'll move it to that position. So once again, basic concept. You can use these dimension values, especially as you begin to create geometry and you know something's a specific size. As you're moving them around, you can just use those values in the move dialog and then get it into the right spot. Now that we've got basically a row of batteries, the next thing I'm going to do is box select. And keep in mind when you box select, if you come from the upper left to the bottom right, it's only going to grab everything that is completely encompassed in the box. If you go from the bottom right to the upper left, it'll grab anything that is crossing the box. So basically we don't have to have it completely in. One thing that you may want to keep in mind is the selection filter at the top. You may want to do basically sheets and solids. So basically it doesn't allow you to select a face or an edge or a vertex. This allows you to only select those bodies. Once we have those, we want to duplicate them. Now as we look at this menu at the bottom, we've got duplicate objects as one of the defaults that always stays there. Shift D is that shortcut key. We're going to left click on that. And instead of moving it a specific amount, we can grab this little blue cube or this teal cube here, and that allows us to move it in plane. And what we can do is we can move it up and we can kind of move it over and just visualize it. We're not making something that is perfect. This is just, again, to get used to these tools. Right click to accept, left click to deselect. So now we've got a bunch of batteries. We can kind of use this as a rough idea for how tall 2 rows of batteries are when they're stacked together, and also, how long a row of 5 batteries is. Now that we've got all these batteries created, we're going to shift select all of them and create a new group. I'm going to double click on the group name and just call these batteries. So this helps because we can turn all of them on and off whenever we want. All right, so the batteries was just kind of a starter exercise to make sure that you're comfortable with creating geometry, moving things around, and getting comfortable with it. Once we don't really need the batteries, again, when I design stuff like this, I typically don't model the battery. I would just have a measurement and understand how much, how big the thing needs to be. And so we can do that. But if you want to model it as practice, you certainly can. The next thing that we want to do is we're going to go to a top view. So we're going to click on Z. This is going to have us looking top down. Now, if you want to bring the batteries back so you can see the orientation they're in this case, you can see that lengthwise they're in the Y direction. So we can draw our rectangle that's going to be the shape or the size of our box or container here. We can draw it longer in that Y direction. We want to start with a rectangle, and I'm going to hold down the left mouse button, and this expands the menu, and we want to use the center rectangle option. Because we did so much work to make sure everything was centered about the origin, we want to use that to our advantage. It helps us with things like mirroring features or just keeping everything centered. So we're going to click on the origin with the left mouse button and then begin to drag this out. This automatically has dimensions, but we have to hit tab to get to them. And so for our purposes, remember a battery is roughly 14.5 by 50.5. So what we're going to do is do 52, hit tab again, and make it 90 millimeters long and hit enter. This is going to be the inside. So if we bring the batteries back, you can see that 5 batteries fits perfectly fine in here. It actually will hold 6, and then we could have 5 stacked on top of it, or 6 depending on how tall you make it. So this gives us a good idea basically of the inside shape of that box. Before I go any further, I'm going to go back and turn on all of my selection filters because I do need access to those corner points. You can do this with tab on the keyboard or 5 on the numbers across the top. If you don't like to do that, you can also hold down shift and just click all of them. But now it opens up these corner points. So what we're going to do is box select this, and we're going to use the fillet option. Now, one thing to remember if you don't want to use shortcuts, if you click on, for example, a corner point like this, the fillet tool doesn't automatically start. It does when you click on an edge of a solid body. So for something like this, what we might want to do is click the control point tool, select just the control points, and then we can go into this 3-dot menu, which is going to be our contextual tools, and we can get the fillet tool. Now, the contextual tools are going to be available based on your selection. You'll notice most of them are grayed out. We've got curve array, cut, and fillet that are active. Also, you can see the shortcut key is B. So we'll click on fillet. This gives us this little widget on the screen. If we drag it up, we're going to get a rounded corner, a fillet. If we drag it down, we're going to get basically a beveled corner or a chamfer. And so what we want to do is we want to drag this up. The radius value is actually going to have an impact on how well batteries fit into the corners. I would suggest keeping it somewhere around 2 millimeters. That will be small enough that the batteries can fit into the corner well. If you make it larger, like 5 millimeters, the batteries won't be able to go all the way to the corner. So again, you just have to play around with it. If you're making something and actually printing it, making it bigger, then you may want to change those dimensions. So I'm going to hit enter. And now that we have that, I'm going to go back to my all selection. So again, 5 on the keyboard. And what I want to do now is select the curve, and I want to offset it. Now, offset can be done with the O key on the keyboard. And again, we can go down to this 3-dot menu. And when we look through this list, offset curve is kind of right in the middle. All right, so the distance we're going to offset this is going to be the thickness that we want to print it. For a part like this, 2 millimeters to 3 millimeters is generally good. 3 is going to be fairly sturdy. 2 might be a little flimsy, but depending on the material, we're going to be using basic PLA. It might be fine. So I'm just going to say -3 in this case and hit enter to accept. All right, so let's rotate this around, and The first thing that we want to do is create the base. Excuse me. Let's get a little bit of water. And with the base, we're just going to select the profiles and shift select both of them and then begin to pull it down. We're going to do 3 millimeters because that's the wall thickness of everything that we're going to do. Right click to accept. Then we'll come back and select this, and we're going to be just begin pulling this up. So for this part, the height is going to depend on how many batteries you want to stack in this thing. So if you make it like 25 to 30 millimeters, it works well for basically two rows of batteries. So I'm going to do 30 millimeters. That's a little taller than 2 batteries because remember they're 14.5 diameter. So even if they're stacked exactly on top of each other, 30 they'll completely be under the lip. If you make it 25, then the top row of batteries, if they are not nested in between the row below, then they're going to stick up a little higher. It's just not as stable. But again, you can kind of make up the decision. The other thing that we want to do while we're in here is note there is a option down here to union. So we're going to hit Q on the keyboard. So we want to select the target body, and then Q on the keyboard will union. So hit Q again. It should turn blue. Right click to accept, and we should just have one solid body. We want to hide these curves. We might need them later, but for right now we don't. And now you can see that we've got essentially a basic tray. You could print this out, toss some batteries in, and it would work fine. But we want to make some modifications because this is not going to be the best option to get batteries in and out. So I'm going to cut a recess on the side. This can be done a couple of different ways. So we could use tools like extrude, cut, basically draw a rectangle and extrude it down. We could split the face up and use offset. Basically all sorts of different ways that we can do this. The way I'm going to do it is just with an extrude cut. So center rectangle, start here and drag it out. We are going to hit tab for the first dimension. I can't really see it. There it is. Let's make it 30 millimeters wide. Tab again. This one doesn't really matter as much as long as it's outside of the overall shape. So I'm just going to say 110 and hit enter. Now as we rotate this around, notice that this is at the top of the object. It wasn't on the top plane or the XY plane. Now because of that, it potentially complicates things. In reality, it would have been easier if it had snapped to the bottom face and we were able to just extrude up. That's okay, there are things that we can do, but let's go ahead and select it and begin to pull it down. And then hold down the control key and hover over one of the edges and it'll snap to one of those bottom edges. Then what we want to do is we actually want to remove this geometry from the other. So we're going to select the target body right here and then right click to accept. By default, it wants to cut it. We'll hide the rectangle. We could delete it. We don't need it, but for right now, let's just keep it. All right, so again, fairly simple tray. But the other thing that we need to consider is we actually want to do some sort of pattern on the bottom. We want to make this thing unique. That is going to be a lot easier before we make that cut, and I'll show you why. So what we're going to do is Control Z to undo that cut and keep that rectangle. So we're going to use it later to make the cut. But the thing that we want to do is we want to split the inside of this. Now, if we take a look at this original rectangle here, we have a curve that is the inside shape that we can use to split the base. Now, the reason I say this is easier before we get rid of the geometry on the side is because essentially the workflow here is to divide this back up into 2 pieces, do any modifications we want on the base of it, and then join them back together. The reason that's easier is because if we didn't happen to save this curve, or let's say that we drew this rectangle with sharp corners and we applied a fillet to the solid, then we wouldn't actually have a curve that did this already for us. So if you don't have that curve available to you, I'll show you how to get around that. We're going to select the edge option. I'm going to hover over one of these inside edges and hold down Alt and click it. Once we do that, then we're going to select the duplicate option. We're going to right click, and then if I hide the solid, you'll notice that now we've got that curve. So essentially what we did was we selected that edge and we duplicated it, so now we've got that curve. There are other ways that we can go about this. I'm going to go ahead and turn all these back on with tab or 5 across the numbers at the top. Now, there are other ways that we can do this, and we don't necessarily have to extract that curve, but I find that this is actually a pretty useful tool to understand. So if you want to pull that curve out, and again, plenty of other options and tools and ways that we can do this. For our example, that works well. So now we've got this curve. What we want to do is we want to cut the solid body into 2 pieces. This can be done again from this little 3-dot menu. Select cut, select the solid body, and right click. We want to hide the curve. And now what we have here is we've got a solid for the base and a solid for the top. And what we should see is that this top piece goes all the way to the bottom, and the bottom piece is basically sliced out from it. So hide the top or the vertical walls, and we're going to focus just on this bottom piece. So again, Z down. The thing that we want to do is create essentially like an ISO grid. Now, if you don't know what an ISO grid is, this is something that's typically used in like aerospace for lightning, but basically just creating a polygon cut out of the part. Now, the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to start with the polygon. I'm going to start up here just kind of off the part. Notice that there's a pink line. That pink line is going to be a vertical reference, and we want to make sure that we stick with that, because if we start to go off and the angles get off, it makes it really hard to pattern. So I'm going to stick with that vertical line. I'm going to hit tab, and I'm going to give this one 14 millimeters and hit enter. We're going to repeat that again, find the center point, again stick with vertical, hit tab, and let's say 9 millimeters. Now the reason I arrived at those, 14 was just a number that I picked. 9 is so that we've got 3 millimeters here, which is going to be the wall thickness. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to cut this part out of the base, and this is going to give us essentially a thick wall. Now you could have done this at half the size. So for example, I chose 3 to have a pretty thick section here. In reality, that's going to leave 6 millimeters between these sections. If you wanted to make it smaller, so let's go ahead and delete that and just show you. So if you wanted to make it smaller, I'm going to hit tab. Instead of doing 14 minus, basically instead of doing 3 millimeters smaller than the large one, you would want to make it 1.5 millimeters smaller. So instead of 14, we're going to do 12.5. That's going to leave a fairly thin section. And then when we pattern it, basically what we're going to be doing is doubling this thickness. So you just kind of have to decide how thick you want this to be on the bottom for your part. What I'm going to do here is, let's go ahead and just make it, let's make it 12, and 12 will be okay. All right, so now that we've got these two, we're going to shift select so that both of them are selected, and we're going to use duplicate. Now, in this case, duplicate might be kind of hard to see. Let me go ahead and move this down so these are on the black background. So what we're going to do is select the freestyle option. So freestyle is F on the keyboard. And then what we want to do is we want to take from this point and we want to copy it down to this point and then right click. So once again, the reason for this is because we're going to be building a pattern. And the pattern needs to be done in this way, because if we do a linear pattern out to the right and then one down, it won't work based on the geometry. It needs to have 2 of these cells. Before we do any more, we need to add some measurements. Now this can be done with Control and equal. And what I'm going to do is if I start to type in a dimension, you'll notice dimension is equal on the keyboard. This will actually allow us to make some changes to dimensions. If we do measurement or measure distance, you can see here it's Control and equal. For our purposes, we want some main measurements. We want to understand the overall size. So what we're going to do is select measure distance, and I want to know the distance from left to right. It's 12.12. Now I'm going to repeat that. You can do that with Shift and R, or you can go back in and you can find the measure, or you can use Control and equal. All right, we want to know the overall height here, which is 14. That was the dimension that we inputted. The other thing that we need to know, let's go ahead and do Control and equal for this, is to go from here to there. Now the reason that one's important is because when we pattern vertically, we're going to need that number. So when we pattern horizontally, we need 12.12. When we pattern vertically, we'll need 21. So we don't actually need the outside polygon, we just need these inside ones. We're going to do a rectangular array. We're going to do out to the right, Again, we want to snap to that pink line, making sure it's horizontal. And then we're going to change this to spacing. The spacing is going to be 12.12, and the number of instances in this case, let's make it 6 and hit enter. Now, the reason I'm not doing the second instance here is because, again, I want to talk about this one step at a time and understanding that we're patterning to the right, the inside hex or the inside polygon, and we really just use these outside ones to dictate where basically the dimensions that we need to pattern to get the appropriate amount of material between them. All right, so all of them are still selected. That's one of the really nice things that happens with plasticity. So we can just go back to the rectangular array tool. Again, we want to find that vertical snap, which is going to be, it's going to have that lowercase y next to the cursor. Left click. We're going to change it to spacing. This is going to be 14 millimeters. I'm sorry, 21 millimeters. And then we need to pick the number of instances. So if we zoom out, that's too many. So let's try 5 and hit enter. That'll be fine. All right, so we've got some over here that are well outside. So what I'm going to do is just actually, let's go to curve the edges. I'm going to come down here from the bottom and let's grab these. I'm going to hit H on the keyboard, or you can hit the eyeball icon to hide those. Again, we'll hide this outside one. Basically anything that is completely outside of the shape, we want to hide because it's not going to do anything for us. So I'm going to just grab these, grab that one and that one. So H on the keyboard again is that quick. It looks like I maybe hid one I shouldn't have. Let's bring this back. Yeah, I shouldn't have hidden that one. And now that we've hidden those, you can go through your list and anything that's hidden. So like these polygons, I can shift select and hit delete because I don't need them. Shift select and hit delete and get rid of those. So basically any extras that we don't need. The next thing that we need to do is we need to extrude all of these. This is really important. You want to be careful basically which selection filter you have, because if we select these and extrude them, what we're going to end up doing if we have the all selection turned on is we're going to get solids and we're going to get sheets or surfaces. Now, if we have the face option turned on, this is going to just extrude solids. It will include the solid on the bottom though. So you have to be careful. So what we're going to do is start to extrude these out, bring the solid back, and then we're going to use the option to cut it away. So select the target body, select the rectangle, then right click. Now all these polygons, we don't need them anymore, so we can add them to a group, we can hide them. I'm going to just delete them. And then I'm going to bring back the other original solid. So now you can see we've got basically that hex pattern. So I'm going to go back to all selection, again, tab or the number 5 across the top. We're going to select the side. We want to use Boolean, which is Q on the keyboard. Select this piece. You will need to either hit Union over here or Q on the keyboard, right click, and now we've added those together. Now we can bring back that rectangle, select it, and begin to pull it down. Hold down Control to snap. And again, select target bodies. I'm going to cut away from this, right click, and hide the rectangle. So you can see that this all goes pretty quickly. It looks to me like I may have snapped a little bit too far down. So you can see that they're kind of lower in the middle. So what I want to do is just undo that and get back to a better view, and then hold down Control and make sure I'm snapping to the top. Target body again is the main body, right click, and then hide the rectangle again. So you can see there. Sometimes when you have X-ray turned on, which is this button up here, it can be hard because it's very easy to select those bottoms. We need to have X-ray on for the next thing we're going to do, but that does help. All right, so now we want to add some fillets to the bottom, but we don't want to add fillets to everything. So we're going to look at this from the side view here, change our selection filter to edge. I'm going to drag the box from the bottom right to the upper left, rotate around, hold down Control, and deselect these big vertical edges. So these big vertical edges, they have tangency. A fillet won't be applied, but you'll probably get an error if you try to apply it. All we want are all the edges that are based on those hexes. We could have actually added this to the sketch, the curve or the sketch before we did our pattern. before we started copying stuff. We could have rounded them before and maybe saved a little time. It's okay here. All right, and then again, we're going to go into fillet. Again, B on the keyboard if you want to do that. And we're going to just add a small fillet. Let's try 0.75, see if that works. Yeah, it looks okay. You want to be careful not to do it too large, again, because we've got some areas here where it might completely go away, but that looks okay. All right, and now we've got a nice hex pattern. The other thing that we want to do is I'm going to select some of these edges. To add more edges, you need to hold down the Shift key. Control will remove edges. So for example, if I selected one too many and hit Control, I could take it away. And then what we want to do is actually I'm going to add a chamfer here. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to round these corners off. So once again, you have to hold down Shift to do this. Come over here. And we'll grab this one here. And now I want to round these off. So just kind of do that. I also want to round off the bottom. So let's say this edge. And again, if you want, turn off X-ray. It can make the selection process easier if you don't like selecting through. It'll just mean that you likely need to rotate this a bit more. Let's go ahead and do this. After you've entered a dimension, you actually do need to hold down Control to add to the selection. I don't know why it's different there. In most cases, adding Shift before you have a dimension here is fine, but once you've actually got a 3D preview of the fillet, you need to hit Control to temporarily disable that. I'm going to just use a nice round number, 3 millimeters, because that's what I like to do. All right, the last thing that we want to do here is round some of these other sections off. Again, once we have a preview, hold down Control and add to it. And we'll need to add to this side as well. And basically just softening everything up. Now, when we're 3D printing, the stuff that's going up in the Z direction, those fillets will print just fine. These ones here, not as much. If you make it larger, it helps. But it's not going to be great, but I don't want to have that sharp corner either. So I do want to round it off a little bit. You do need to be careful that you can see that it's kind of rolling into some of these openings here. So I don't really love that. So maybe I'll leave the inside one sharp and I'll leave the outside one rounded. All right. And that's it. So the next thing would be to print it. So I am going to save it. I haven't done any saves at all, which is really bad practice. So I need to find this. I recently upgraded my system to Windows 11, unfortunately, and nothing is the same. All right, so now that we've got it sorted, we're going to go File, Export. Now, depending on your specific printer or the slicer you're using, you may find that you go to a mesh file directly. You may export a step file and bring a solid model or a B-rep into the print slicer. For me, I'm just going to go ahead and kick the density all the way up, hit OK, and export that STL. Then I need to open up, I'm using Bamboo Labs, and I'm going to just open up the slicer, and we'll open that and prep it in there. Now, if you're not 3D printing it, then you can obviously check out of this video now. One thing to remember, if you are looking to buy Plasticity, we are an affiliate. You can use the code LEAD10 at checkout. That will save you 10%. I always forget to put that in the beginning of the video, so maybe I'll cut that into the video as well. All right, so under Prepare, if you're using Bamboo Labs, just need to add the model. So I'll need to go to the location. Again, how to, sandbox, and battery tray. So it brings the battery tray in. If I want to use any special settings, I can change it. I'm not going to. I do have an AMS, so I do need to connect the device, actually. And then I will slice this. I'm going to print it with infill. It doesn't need to be solid. If you do need it to be stronger, you can obviously do that. But for just a battery tray in a drawer, I think this works fine. Again, those fillets on the corners are likely not going to print very well. The stuff here, that chamfer, is going to be fine, but for the most part, it's going to be okay. I'll make sure the device is connected. I'm just going to use blue. It's what's currently loaded, and then I'm going to print the plate. So it's going to send it off to the printer. I'm going to allow it to print. And once it's done, we'll just check back in and see how it works. And there we go. Print's all done. Everything came out as expected. The print looks pretty good. Even though it's got infill, it's still fairly durable and holds plenty of AA batteries. So as I said, this is just kind of a simple example, something that we can play around with. You can make variations of it. I use these for all sorts of little things. Again, batteries is one. I've got bigger trays for things like scissors and clips for coupons and things like that that just go in junk drawers. And it really helps just keep things a little bit more organized. So if you decide to make something like this, or if you have any questions and want to leave a comment, go ahead and leave that below. And again, remember, we are an affiliate. So if you do want to buy Plasticity and you want a discount, you can use the code LEAD10 at checkout. It saves you 10% and helps out the channel as well. So as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.